Anyway, so I said, sure, I'll give it a shot. I didn't know. So I sat down and wrote a 1 minute theme song that started with like a little string quartet, a little Mozart like ish string quartet and harpsichord, and then broke into this rock segment and then ended again with the string quartet and harpsichord. And I sent it off to Warner Brothers and with like little to no expectations. And because I had no credits in my name, no agent, no anything. And like the next day, phone rings again, and this guy says, Ed, they want to meet you. And I was like, seriously? So I went into Warner Brothers. I met with these producers, and then they looked at me, and they're like, look, we don't know who you are, but we love this music, and we want to use it. And I was like, well, fine. Okay, that's great.
You're listening to Music Dialogue. Hear the stories behind iconic theme songs, scores, and jingles directly from the composers and music supervisors who made them happen. In this episode, composer Ed Alton tells the story of how a phone call from a friend turned into his first job as composer on a series for ABC that ran for 5 seasons. Ed also recounts his experience writing the theme for the hit Nickelodeon show Salute Your Shorts and his time on the TBS show My Boys.
The first person I met that really had a big impact was a bunch of friends of mine. We went down to New York City one night to the Village Vanguard to hear Elvin Jones play. And we're sitting there, and then I look at a table a few tables away, and I recognize Stanley Clarke and Lenny White sitting there. And this was right after Light as a Feather came out. And the first time I had ever heard Stanley, and it was, of course, blown away by him. So there I was sitting there in the Village Vanguard, it was my senior year in high school. And I said, oh my God, that's Stanley Clarke. I have to go over to him. And so I did. I grew up in Connecticut, so we were down there for just the night. So I went over to Stanley and I introduced myself, and I said, I couldn't even believe these words are coming out of my mouth because I was talking to Stanley Clarke. But I said, Stanley, do you teach? And he was very gracious and very nice. And he said, well, I'm on tour with Chick right now, and we're going to London. And blah, blah. He said, but here's my address. Here, write me a letter. Can you give me your information? So I said, okay. So I wrote him a note, and I was sure I wasn't going to hear from him again. And then like about a few weeks later, I get this letter from Stanley from London. They're on the road, and he said, hey, Ed, I'll be back in New York in a couple of weeks, and give me a call. So obviously I did. And then from that point on, I would like once a week take the bus from Connecticut down to New York to take bass lessons with Stanley Clarke. And this was like blowing my mind. And Stanley was a very sweet, nice, good-natured guy and a monster musician. And this really was like lighting my fire. And so anyway, then that was the summer. And then the fall after that was my first year at Carnegie Mellon as an art major. So there I'm off at Carnegie Mellon studying art, but also playing in bands and in the Pittsburgh area and keeping in touch with Stanley. And the growing interest in music was getting more intense. And then by my sophomore year in Carnegie Mellon at art school, I said, I really want to take some time off from art. I got to explore this. I got to. And Stanley was encouraging me to, So I said, okay, so I'm going to take some time off from art school. I ended up going from Pittsburgh to Boston to Berkeley and to study music, just to see if this was a possibility for me. So I did. And I felt like a total fish out of water going from art school to music school, especially Berkeley School of Music, because all of a sudden I was surrounded by like what seemed like thousands of people carrying guitar cases, and I've never seen so many guitars in my life. But anyway, I was at Berkeley for a couple of years, and the interest was growing more. But then I decided after 2 years at Berkeley that this was great, but I wanted more. I wanted more of a classical foundation. So from Berkeley, I went back to the Hart School of Music in Connecticut, which is my hometown, and there was a very famous classical bass player teaching there named Gary Carr, who was like one of the world's most famous bass soloists. So I went there to study with him. And while I was there, I was there as a bass major, and then I became a double major in bass and composition. And I started studying composition with a teacher named Arnold Franchetti. And between Gary and Arnold, these two teachers, and Stanley, these teachers really changed the course of my life forever. So at heart, Arnold Franchetti was a life-changing force. I mean, he was, at the time I was studying with him, he was about in his 70s or so. And he had actually studied with Richard Strauss in Germany. He was born in Italy. And like the 1937 or 39, he studied with Richard Strauss in Germany. Then he came to the United States in 1947. And so this guy was steeped in the European tradition of composing. And for all those years, I was just trying to be Bartok. I just was, I was living and breathing the pandiatonic dialogue. So, in this short period of time, going from an art major to Berkeley, hopping to Berkeley, and then going down to Hart, and I was at Hart for like 5 years and graduated with a degree in bass and a degree in composition. But at that point, TV music, film music was not on my radar, not on anything I was paying attention to in terms of what I wanted to do. I was ready to do something. So I moved from Connecticut to Los Angeles. And when I got out to LA, since I played bass guitar and upright bass and classically trained, in a matter of time, I was doing lots of film session dates as a bassist, some record dates, and getting pretty busy doing studio work. And then I started playing with the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra as well. So between the Hollywood Bowl and studio work for films, that was keeping me busy as a bass player. But at that point, I knew that writing music was something that was more important to me than playing bass, and I was trying to figure out any way to start writing music and making a living at it, because I was making an okay living as a bass player, but that was kind of a dead end. I didn't see that as a much more than what it was. So there were two opportunities that came up for me around that time. That basically I was looking for any opportunity to put myself in an environment of where somebody's writing music for film or TV. And two opportunities came up that were unusual, and most people wouldn't have taken them, but I grabbed them both. Okay, one was I met a film composer named Ira Newborn. Now, Ira was in like the 80s, he was doing all the John Hughes movies. So Ira was like really riding the crest of the wave in his career, and he hired me as his assistant, as his personal assistant. And so that meant that I just was like sitting in the room while he was composing, and I got to sit in the room and just watch him score like movies like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Dragnet, Wise Guys. This is all like in the mid to late 80s. And that was invaluable, just to sit there like a fly on the wall and watch Ira write the music, watch him looking at the movie, listen to him on the phone, screaming at the producers. And it was really on the job training. Then another opportunity came up at the same time. An old Carnegie Mellon friend of mine named Gary Chang, who's a very brilliant composer and musician in his own right, was out here as well, and he was doing Fairlight program. He was a genius with electronic music, and the composer Pat Williams at that time had bought a Fairlight, and Gary is one of the few people in town that actually knew how to use it, to program it. So Gary would program Pat's Fairlight on these TV and movie dates that Pat was doing. So Gary asked me if I wanted to do a cartage for him. So cartage means basically just like lugging the thing from one studio to another. So I said, sure, okay. So here I am, like at that point, I'm like still doing bass studio gigs, working for Ira Newborn as an assistant, and now I'm doing cartage for my friend Gary Chang. So the cartage gig was also invaluable because I would bring it to, let's say he had, a scoring date with like Henry Mancini. And he'd say, okay, so drop the Fairlight off at, Tuesday at 9. So I'd bring the Fairlight to the studio Tuesday at 9. but then I wouldn't leave. I would just go. I would just kind of like I would just kind of go to this side of the room in the studio, pull up a chair, and just sit there like a fly on the wall and sit there and just watch like Henry Mancini conducting a film date, or Pat Williams conducting a film date. And so doing the cartage gig was allowing me to be there and see these brilliant, towering people in our industry doing this brilliant work. So between soaking that up and Ira's, working with Ira, it was really it was two fantastic experiences of like on the job training, and I was getting paid for both too, so it didn't suck too bad. So then around that time, which was like the mid '80s, late '80s, at that time still I had no idea of like how to break into writing for TV, or I was just doing this in blind faith and just waiting to see what would happen. Then one day something did happen, and a phone rang, and I was offered an opportunity to submit a theme song for a TV pilot from a friend who had some connections. And my first question was, well, what's a pilot? I didn't even know the terminology, what these things were called. So he explained, well, it's just in one episode of a TV series, and they're looking for a theme song that involves classical and rock, and it's a TV show about really smart kids in a class. And that's all the information I got. And at that time, this was like 1986. It was like pre-MIDI. I mean, MIDI was like just breaking out. So all I had was my Roland Jupiter 8 and my and actually a DX7. And the only sequencer I had was the Roland MC8, the Microcomposer 8, which worked on CV gates. I don't know if anybody even remembers that, but it was pre-MIDI, and it was pretty labor intensive to program any kind of music on those old computers. And but anyway, so I said, sure, I'll give it a shot. I didn't know, so I sat down and wrote a 1 minute theme song that started with like little string quartet, little Mozart like ish string quartet and harpsichord, and then broke into this rock segment, and then ended again with the string quartet and harpsichord. And I sent it off to Warner Brothers, and with like little to no expectations. And because I had no credits in my name, no agent, no anything. And like the next day, phone rings again, and this guy says, Ed, they want to meet you. And I was like, seriously? And so I went into Warner Brothers. I met with these producers, and then they looked at me, and they're like, look, we don't know who you are, but we love this music and we want to use it. And I was like, well, fine. Okay, that's great. So that was Head of the Class. That was an ABC hit that ran 5 years, and it was my first time at bat. And when I did the music for Head of the Class in the very beginning, all the music, all the training I had seen from Ira Newborn doing his film composing, and watching Henry Mancini and Pat Williams and all these brilliant guys on the stage. I was ready. I was prepared because of all of that. So when I found myself on the recording stage for the first time for Head of the Class, actually it was kind of a funny story, because in doing cartage, I had been like lugging this Fairlight around the studio. So most of the musicians, these like the A-list yo-cats would see me on all these recording sessions, but they just knew me as the cartage guy for the Fairlight. So on my first session for Head of the Class for the theme song, I actually hired a lot of these players, like Steve Schaefer on drums and Jim Cox on keyboard and Dean Parks on guitar, and so they showed up to the Warner Brothers scoring stage, and they saw me, and they kind of nodded to me, and I assumed, and I kind of laughed because they recognized me as the cartage guy. But then when the downbeat came for the recording session to start, and I walked over to the podium, and walked up on the podium and picked up the score and said, "Okay, let's start with One on One." They all looked at each other like, "Wait a second, isn't that the cartage guy?" So that was a little poetic justice that that all of a sudden I had elevated my stature. And they were great guys, great musicians. And so anyway, we did the theme song. I scored the show for 5 years, and in a nutshell, that's not a nutshell. That's a pretty big nutshell, but that's how I got my start.
So a few years after Head of the Class started, you had an opportunity to write the theme song and score for the classic Nickelodeon show, Salute Your Shorts. Can you tell the story about how you got hired on that project and what it was like writing the theme?
Sure. Yes. That's an interesting story of how it was kind of a blind date of sorts. It's kind of that what happened is that I'm from Connecticut, and at that time my mom said, "Hey, I met so and so, a friend of hers in Connecticut, and so has a cousin who's a producer, writer out in Hollywood, and I want you guys to meet. I want to fix you guys up, And I'm like, oh, come on, Mom, really, So I didn't know anything about who this guy was, and she says, but you should call him. So she gave me this guy's number. His name was Steve Slavkin. She says, yeah, Steve's the son of this woman who I know. And so anyway, so it was kind of like one of those things where I got this phone number of this guy from Connecticut and call him up. So I did, and he seemed like a nice guy, and we kind of hit it off. And right at that time, he had written the book Salute Your Shorts. It was a book, I think, first, before it was a TV series. And right at that time, he was getting ready to film the pilot episode of the Nickelodeon series. And I guess at that time, see, that was 1991. So by that time, I had already done like 5 years ahead of the class. So so he realized that I was a working guy, and that I was a professional, and had a reputation, and so he was willing to entrust me with his baby there. So we met for lunch, and then we hit it off as friends. And then when they filmed the pilot, he got the idea of basically Steve wrote the lyrics for the theme song. So Steve Slavkin, it was his brainchild to write this hilarious camp song. And Steve, I have to say, is probably one of the funniest people I've ever met in my lifetime. So, comedy just comes to him like breathing. So he was going to film the main title sequence live, and he wanted the piano track. So I wrote the music, he wrote the lyrics. So I pre-recorded the piano track, and then they played it back on stage. And there was a lot of ad-libbing in the main title sequence, as you probably can tell, But I think that the biggest claim to fame was having contributed to probably the only TV theme song that has the word fart in the lyrics. So that was kind of prestigious. We were breaking new ground there. But I think since I was not there when they were filming it, I had done the piano track ahead of time, music ahead of time. I don't know how much of it was planned and how much of it was accidental or ad-libbed. I think that at the very end of the song, when Donkey Lips goes, this thing came apart. I think something like that. He's holding like a fishing rod in his hand or something. I can't remember. But I think stuff like that was ad-libbed in the moment, and it was hilarious. So they slapped it together. But that theme song was it was a gem. It was Steve's idea. It was Steve's creation, and it was just it just worked. It worked, While the show was on the air, it was popular, but I don't think that any of us had an idea of that it was going to have such longevity as a pop hit until many years later. I think that while it was, because after 2 seasons it was canceled, of course, because Nickelodeon, I don't think knew what they were doing then. It had done well, but it basically after 2 years, after 26 episodes, it disappeared. And then I think it was years after that people kind of like started to find it on YouTube or whatever, and started to get popular. I remember that. I think it may have been about 4 or 5 years ago. There was like this reunion downtown LA. I forget what the convention. It was some big convention, and part of it was a Salute Your Shorts reunion. And so they had the whole cast there, and Steve Slavkin was there, his family. I went down, and we were going to give like this presentation in this big kind of in this big room. And we were all in this green room kind of waiting, and we're like, yeah, there's probably going to be 5 people in there. We had no idea. But it was really fun to see the cast again and see the producers and see everybody. So when it came time, they paraded us into this room, which was a fairly large room with lots of seats. The room was like standing room only. It was filled to the maximum. We couldn't believe it. And we did this panel discussion about the show, but we started the whole thing off with singing the theme song. And Steve led everybody, and everybody. There could have been like a couple hundred people there in the audience. I don't know, but everybody knew the lyrics to the theme. Everybody sang it. It was a riot. So the theme song, and you can find like covers of the theme on YouTube. It just it lives on in its own bizarre way, I guess. But it was fun.
In 2006, you scored the show My Boys on TBS that went for 4 seasons. Can you talk about working on that show and maybe how if things changed at all from when you started working on sitcoms back in the 90s to now we're in the early 2000s?
My Boys was undoubtedly my favorite show of all the shows I've done. Betsy Thomas was the executive producer and creator of the show, and this was one of 3 shows I did with her. First, we did a show called Run of the House for WB in 2004. Then we did My Boys in 2006, and then we did a show called Whitney after that. But My Boys was a single camera comedy as opposed to the other series, most of the other series I did, which were multi-cam comedies. And My Boys was so special because Betsy's from Chicago. She loves Chicago. And the show took place in Chicago. And her idea was, she wanted it to have a real flavor of old Chicago blues. And that was just a blast. So my job was to create music in the style of the classic old blues. Betsy was like, it's got to be gritty. It's got to be old. I don't want it slick. I don't want it clean. So I wrote in the style of like Muddy Waters, Sonny Boy Williams and Howlin' Wolf, Buddy Guy, all the classic Chicago guys. And a good part of each episode would take place in this bar called Crowley's. This is where the gang always used to hang out. And so there was always music playing in the background of Crowley's. So I had to create like a music library of enough long pieces of music to cover these long scenes in the bar. And the music in the background was always in this style of this old Chicago blues. So it was just a blast. And then the music for the show itself was also in the similar style. It was just all bluesy, gritty. And it was also, it was fun for me because I got to try all kinds of new things since like this was a show that was, it was done for Sony and there was no budget to go to a studio with live musicians. So I did it all myself. So basically all the instruments were all live, but it was all me. So, I'm playing guitar and I actually had a really woodshed blues harp and I played all the blues harp, and, bass, piano. Piano wise, I had to try to emulate, the amazing Otis Spann and, the old blues piano riffs. But the music was such an integral part of the character of the show that's what made it so much fun to work on. And like in each half-hour episode may have had like some of them had like 20 plus minutes of music. So it was just a great gig. Working with Betsy was the best, and I loved the show. And the characters and the writing was just a home run in every sense.
You've been really successful in an unconventional profession. You've worked on over probably 500 episodes of television. What does that success mean to you, having devoted your whole life to music?
Well, I don't know if the success means so much to me, but the thing that I value very highly is being a team player and being really professional, creating music and art that's genuine and is just as good as the best that I can do. So basically, every show I was on, every opportunity I had to write music, I just wanted to do what was right for that show. And that was one of the great things about all the series I did, is that every series was a different style of music. So it was all these opportunities, but to dive into new styles and different styles. but I never, I mean, it was very satisfying to have worked as long as I did for as many years as I have, and I'm still working, and to have that kind of longevity in a business like this. I mean, back when I was in art school and wanting to change the music, I was like, well, this is pretty risky. This is, but it worked out just fine. It worked out way better than fine, and that makes me very happy that that I was able to have a good, solid, long career. I've established a lot of good relationships with producers that would keep hiring me for their shows, because that's really what it's all about is establishing good relationships, and hopefully those relationships will keep using you. So I think that because now at this point in my life, I've actually kind of come full circle. It's a wonderful part in my life right now because I've come back to my art. So basically now I'm doing music and art at the same time. So it's kind of like full circle for me. But I have a lot of, I really take a lot of pride in all the work I've done in television, music, and films. But I don't blow it out of proportion either. It was work. It was good work, and I did it the best I could. And it's just I was fortunate to have done it for as many years as I've done it.
How much of the business is luck and how much of it's hard work?
Well, that's easy. The way I look at my working career is I don't think, well, really the only luck part that I could really say was luck or lucky was that first opportunity that I had to submit for head of the class, because at that point, back in the 80s, don't forget the playing field was much smaller. And nowadays there's like thousands and thousands of people wanting to get into this business, and the competition is crazy. But back in those days, there were just fewer people. But nevertheless, the opportunity that came up for me to submit for head of the class was I was lucky that my phone rang, but I delivered the right music. I delivered it on time, and I think from that point on, I wouldn't attribute my career to luck. But what is attributed to luck is the success of a TV series. So whether a series runs 5 minutes or 5 years, that we have no control over. And some of the series I did do 5 years. Some of them did 5 minutes. So that was the luck of a show catching on, grabbing an audience or not is something that's out of our control. But as far as actually working as a composer and getting jobs, that was through doing demos, relationships, and hard work.
What does an average day look like for you today and during the pandemic?
Well, of course, the family life has changed because my daughter does school from home. My wife works from home, and fortunately, I have a studio, a separate studio in my backyard, or a music studio, so I can escape every day, which is very nice. But right now, like I said, I've really focusing on my art right now. But music-wise, I'm still scoring some films and some. In fact, I just wrote a theme song for a very good producer friend of mine named Frank Pace, who I did like over 10 series with. I think Frank was producer on Head of the Class, and Suddenly Susan, Nikki, Daddy Dearest, Something Wilder. So he and I go way back, and he has a podcast right now called A Mick, a Mook, and a Mike on YouTube. Frank Pace and Billy O'Connor is a writer. They do it together. So he asked me to write him a theme song. So I just did that, and it was, turned out great. We just did it. It's on YouTube. And then also there's a film I scored a while back called Rated with a brilliant director named John Fortson. John Fortson and his wife Christy Lynn Smith co-wrote this little brilliant film that's been in 60 film festivals, and it's won 21 awards for a short film. So that right now is being developed into a feature-length film, and John's already spoken to me about that. And when that gets made into a feature, we'll start work scoring that. But right now, during the pandemic, really taking this time to focus on art, and I've been making a lot of sculpture. I make kinetic sculpture and mobiles, inspired by the great Alexander Calder. So, my time is split between making art and making music, and it's the perfect life, really. I couldn't be happier.
What advice would you offer to anyone that wants to build a career in film and television music?
Leave no stone unturned, in the sense that like there may be some opportunities come up that you may not be too glamorous. Like for me, when my friend offered me to do cartage for him, that's not too glamorous, but yet it was invaluable, the experience. So some opportunities that may come up for younger people that may not seem glamorous is, if it puts you in a situation where you can learn something and see and experience something in this business, then grab it, do it. Don't be afraid by the numbers. If you get an opportunity to submit something for a show, do it. Do a demo. I mean, there's people that may disagree with me on this. There's composers that used to say, well, I won't do free demos. And that's fine. And for them, that's fine. And I respect that. But I got a lot of jobs doing free demos. So, you can do that. It's your choice. So just stay up to date on what the current trends are. There's a group I used to belong to, not only a long group, it's called the Society of Composers and Lyricists. And the SCL is a great forum for young composers to belong to network, to learn about the industry. They have lots of great seminars and lectures. So that would be something that I would strongly recommend. But basically, look at the trades every day, look at the website, see what's being developed, see what's going on, and then call production companies, network with people. As far as composer agents go, I would not even worry about that because, that's never really played a major part in my career. So there are some jobs, I do have representation and they have been helpful at some points, but for the most part, not. So I wouldn't worry about that. So just follow your heart, be fearless. And that's my advice. If you want to do this and do it, be fearless, go for it, and don't be discouraged because, for every job I may have gotten, there's probably like 15 to 20 that I didn't get. So there's a lot of failure mixed in with the success, and that's just the way it is for everybody, I think, in this business.
Thank you so much, Ed, for being a guest on the podcast. It was really great to speak with you today.
Great, Nick. Thanks for including me.
Thanks for listening to Music Dialogue. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe and leave a review wherever you download podcasts. The opening and end music used in this episode was composed by William Ryan Fritsch. You can hear more of his music at williamryanfritsch.com. Follow us on Instagram at Music Dialogue. We'll see you next time.